These are the thoracic vertebrae, if you can see. Thoracic vertebrae, it can be seen properly. Now, let's go to some of the interpretations. Some interpretation like this we can take today. Let's see. Some interpreting X-rays. Now remember, whenever we are interpreting the X-ray, always go step by step. Of course, radiologist look at the X-ray for 10 seconds and can give you a diagnosis or interpretation. But of course, radiologists learn it years and years, and then we can make. But for example, for the somebody who is making an interpretation in a short span of time, or I can say in a first few days, go step by step. Start from the trachea, go to the lungs, three zones, go to the just like step by step we have gone through normal things. That is what we can interpret. So let's first go for some of the interpretations. First, what are the rules of interpretations? We may take the rules today and then actual interpretations in the next class. First thing is don't panic because remember, X-ray are the radiological representation of the abnormal anatomy. So lot of times X-ray may show something, the patient may not have anything. And also a lot of times X-rays may show nothing, the patient can have a severe disorder. We don't have a foolproof X-rays because everything looks black and white. It is sometimes very difficult to interpret. Sometimes a 10-year-old pathology can also be seen, so it can be misleading. So that is what is under. So first understand, don't panic. First, rule number one is don't be in a hurry. Now, before we start, let's say for example, always first check the patient's label. There are labels on the X-ray. Check the name, date of birth, and also the gender. Because a lot of times it can be the gender can make some normal X-ray look abnormal. So understand all those things. Also look for the orientation we talked about. Look for the orientation. First, right or left. Remember all the X-rays, if you can see properly, there's some small R is mentioned on one side. So right or left marker. It is important to know sometimes a normal heart looks like a dextrocardia if you are seeing it from the opposite side, or the uh, the right and left markings are not. Always also look PA or AP view if not label. Now remember, if not label, assuming the PA. 99% times it is a PA view. Only when, for example, when will you take an AP view? Patient is bedridden. That time the X-ray machine goes to the patient's bed and the X-ray machine throws the X-rays from the anterior because patient is bedridden lying on the supine position. Lying in supine position. So in those situations, we may go for a AP view some of the times. Also understand whether it's an inspiratory or expiratory. If not labeled, it is always inspiratory. Remember, technicians always ask the patient to take a breath, hold it, and then throw the X-ray. So it is always inspiratory, all the X-rays. Also, we need to understand because sometimes the anatomy looks different in a supine position, erect position. So if not labeled, assume that it is an erect position. It is an erect position because this, remember one thing is stomach bubble will not be seen in a supine position, only the erect position. Only in the erect position. So before we start interpreting, these things are supposed to be understood or evaluated. I take the screenshot right now. Before you start, always check the name, birth, date, gender, orientation right or left, PA or AP view. If not labeled, it is always an PA view. If not labeled, it is always an inspiratory. If not labeled, it is always an erect view. And also check the rotation that we learned, spinous process from the clavicles that we already have understood. Spinous process from the clavicles. If you can see some of the rotated views, In case of rotated view, if you can see how mistakes can happen. In the rotated film, one lung field appears whiter, the other lung appears more darker because it was completely rotated. Heart looks so big because in the rotated view again. Remember, it is very important to interpret whether the X-ray is rotated or the same patient when position was corrected. This was an X-ray, and patient was rotated. Remember how important it is. And here you are interpreting there's a cardiomegaly and small lungs, and patient has been don't have any problem. This was because of the technician was talking on the mobile phone when the X-ray was being taken. He did not pay attention. How was the patient's position? So a rotated patient can misinterpret the pathology. Remember, we talked about can be right or left. It is always mentioned on the X-ray. You can see left or right, which can be mentioned properly. Okay, some images may show the correct way around. Okay. Sometimes, let's say for example, sometimes it can be opposite. So you can just check. Now we also need to understand whether the exposure was good or not. Remember, what is exposure? It is the amount of radiation, because the black and white shadows will look more black or more white because of the pathology, but also because of the radiation, more or less. So if radiations are exposed more, things will look more white. Radiations are exposed less, it look less. You can see properly, they can't see them at all. Now, what is normal exposure? Should just about to be able to see the thoracic vertebrae through the heart. That means thoracic vertebrae should be seen only slightly. That is what is the normal exposure. Of course, it's all calibrated. If you can't see them at all, that means it's underexposed. Everything will be too white, as we talked about just now. Vertebrae and disc space is very much clear. Everything will look too dark. Remember, it is not only the pathology is important, but also whether the patient X-ray is centralized, exposure is normal, and posture. All those things makes a huge difference in interpretation. So what was an adequate exposure? You should be able to see thoracic vertebrae slightly through the heart. If it is not seen at all, underexposed. So everything will look too white. If it is seen very clearly, everything will look too dark. As we see in the plate or maybe the slide, over and underexposed X-rays, lung pathology is easily obscure and we can misinterpret. Of course, all things are calibrated, but we must understand that radiologists have a habit of looking into all those things. Sometimes an X-ray is normal, but overexposed and underexposed can create a lot of problems. So let me take the screenshot right now. Okay, screenshot right now. Later on, share on the group. It is possible. Also, whether the patient has adequate inspiration or not, because count the ribs. Choose one of the method. Sixth, ninth, or 10th rib posteriorly or sixth rib anteriorly. We already had a word about this. Normal in a full inspiration, anterior ribs are sixth rib, the diaphragm is there, or the posterior one is ninth or 10th rib. It's also important to know understand about the lung span of the lungs. If the inspiration is less, basal lung pathology may be obscure. You may not be able to see the basal lung pathology. So before you start, these things are important. Exposure, centralization, inspiration, position, right or left. All those things are need to be checked. And also, of course, name and age of the patient. Okay, let's call it a day. Now, let me unmute you for some time so that we are going to be Having some doubts right now if it is there. If anybody has got any doubt, you can raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to unmute you. Okay. Other topics in the next class. I'm going to announce the next. I think mostly it will be on Friday, but I'm going to announce on the group. Friday, connect for the abnormal X-rays. Thank you very much.